Okay, welcome everybody. This is Peter Weddle speaking. Thanks very much for the introduction. It's great to have you here, I look forward to sharing the next 45 minutes or an hour with each of you. As you've just heard, the subject for today's presentation is 7 steps to a better job search. Now, I want to acknowledge right up front that some of you aren't going to like what you're going to hear today. It flies in the face of the conventional wisdom of those who say that all you need to do to get a job in today's job market is write a better resume or make more connections on LinkedIn or develop stronger interview skills. Well, frankly, if it were that easy, you wouldn't be here. So I think you deserve to know the truth, and that is, to survive, let alone prosper in today's job market, you're going to have to take 2 very different actions. First, you're going to have to look at yourself in a new way, and second, you will have to become an expert in a new set of behaviors. Collectively, I describe all of that as the practice of career activism. Since this is an academic audience, I know I owe you the courtesy of citing the sources for what I'm about to present. From 1998 to 2009, I wrote a biweekly column for the Wall Street Journal on the changing world of work in America. Part of the research which informed my columns was drawn from a longitudinal survey of job seekers and recruiters that I conducted, and in fact still conduct, on my website. To my knowledge, it is the only survey that probes the preferences and behaviors of both sides of the great employment divide. And today, when I ask folks who are in transition, people like a lot of you, to tell me about their experience in the job market, they describe what sounds like a journey through a modern day shop of horrors. There are endless stories of age, gender, ethnicity, and other biases, of recruiters and HR professionals who have all of the compassion of a brick, of employers that treat people as disposable widgets with DNA, and of an economy that's so unpredictable it's completely immobilized a lot of hiring managers. But here's the rub. While all of those factors do play a role, they are not the primary causes of today's shop of horrors job market. They are not what's making it so difficult for even well-educated people to find work. There are, in fact, 3 other issues that are driving this situation. The first issue that's making it difficult for anyone to survive, let alone prosper in today's job market, is the constricted funnel. Now, there's been no end of discussion about how crowded the job market is, and therefore how much harder it is to stand out in the crowd. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there are now 12.7 million unemployed people in the U.S., and even if you take out the 800,000 or so discouraged workers, there's still a lot of people competing for each opening. But that's only part of the crowd. Survey after survey confirms that a significant number of employed people are also now in the job market, making the numbers even more daunting. So the result is a tsunami of applicants for each opening. I couldn't find an academia-wide number of applicants per opening, but I was able to find one for historians, so we'll use that as a surrogate. According to a 2010 study reported in Perspectives in History, there are now an average of 89 applicants per faculty opening requiring a PhD in that field. So the crowded field is clearly a significant obstacle. But there's an even larger problem going on within academic institutions themselves. Given the intense budget pressures many are facing, they are cutting overhead like crazy. And one of their first targets is the HR department. So what you have now is a smaller staff of people responsible for recruiting, even as the number of openings stays constant or even rises. In fact, according to HigherEdJobs.com's latest quarterly employment report, there are now over 1 million jobs being handled by those smaller recruiting staffs. The net result is a constricted funnel. How constricted? Well, I can't tell you for sure in academia, but in the corporate world, recruiters are now each handling 30, 40, or 50 open recs. So what do? They're looking at 25 to 50% of the applicants and ignoring the rest. In other words, even if you're a perfect match for an opening, you could be eliminated from the process simply because your resume happened to fall into the 50 to 75% of the pile that never gets looked at. Do recruiters feel guilty about that? Absolutely. But all of them believe that their hands are tied. There are just so many hours in the day, so they find the first 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 qualified applicants, whatever will satisfy the hiring manager, and they take a pass on the rest. The second issue causing difficulty in the job market today is the math of the situation. Most of us realize that not all jobs are advertised. According to one recent survey of employers, this hidden job market accounts for 28% of all openings, at least in the private sector. These are opportunities that are typically filled by networking, by the employee referral program, or by a recruiter connecting with someone else directly. Even advertised jobs, however, are not always truly open. As many of you probably suspect, employers may advertise jobs to ensure they insulate themselves from EEO affirmative action problems, but some of those advertised openings, at least, are never intended for an external hire. They will be filled by an internal candidate. The same study that I referenced just a second ago in the corporate world has found that for the last 2 years running, half, 50% of all openings, advertised or not, were actually filled by an organization's current employees. In other words, in the private sector, job seekers only truly have a shot at just 22% of the available positions in the job market. Now, the situation is undoubtedly different in academia, but the math is still hard to take. Once again, I was unable to find a higher education specific set of figures, but I did find a study which indicated that 25% of all openings in not-for-profit organizations are filled by internal candidates. In other words, internal mobility candidates fill openings in the not-for-profit sector at about half the rate of the private sector. So I also used that same 50% rate to decrement the number of positions that are probably filled in academia by networking. The net is that while the academic math is much better than in the private sector, you still only truly have access to about 6 out of 10 openings. And the third issue causing difficulty in the academic job market is the emergence of a new definition of what it means to be a qualified candidate. Historically, a qualified candidate was one whose education and experience enabled them to meet the specified requirements and responsibilities of an open position. The better the match between the employer's specifications and the candidate's credentials, the stronger their candidacy for the job. In essence, the measure of merit was competency. If you could prove you were able to do the job, you were highly likely to get an interview. Today, competence is still important, but it's been supplemented with a new criterion. Employers haven't publicly announced this shift, and in fact, many of them aren't even conscious that they've made it. But they have. And all of the people who perfectly match an opening's stated qualifications today and never get an interview are the proof. Employers now define a qualified candidate as someone who can do the job and will excel at their work. So even to get an interview, an applicant has to prove both competence and the ability to contribute to the organization in an extraordinary way. And here's the rub. Which credentials employers will find most appealing in measuring a person's potential contribution are seldom, if ever, articulated. I've yet to see a job posting that says, quote, "and now tell us how you're going to exceed our wildest expectations," close quote. But unfortunately, that's exactly what employers want to know. So, how can you prevail in this kind of a job market? Well, to be sure, it's not by writing a better resume or making more connections on LinkedIn. Instead, the key is to adopt a new persona, one that I call the career activist. Why? because it involves a fundamental shift in thinking. To borrow a phrase, a career activist is someone who develops the 7 habits of a highly effective job seeker. They're habits because they're actions you should take when you aren't looking for a job as well as when you are. They are the behaviors of lifelong career success. Now, I've listed all of them here, and I'm going to go into each of them in a bit more detail in just a moment. But first, it's important to see each of these habits as steps. Each one represents a passage of sorts. It's a way that you transform yourself, both in the way you look for a job and in the way you manage your career. Now, you're probably going to recognize the job search aspects right away, but the career component is not easy to see. It requires an adjustment in your thinking about your employment goal. Historically, the goal for most Americans in the job market has been job security. As the last 5 years have confirmed, however, that is an increasingly fragile objective. In today's constantly changing budgetary and political environment, employers can't predict their workforce needs 6 months from now, let alone 2 or 3 years down the road. So what's the alternative? Career security. It's the ability always to be employed and always with an employer of your choice. A career activist looks for employment with as much job security as possible in the near term, while simultaneously reinforcing their career security for employment in the long term. So let's take a look at each of the 7 steps in more detail. Step 1 involves pulling yourself out of the boxes that can limit your horizon of possibilities. All of us, to one degree or another, are the captive of 2 kinds of boxes: those we put ourselves in and those we allow others to put us in. In the workplace, these boxes constrain both the way we execute our job search and our ability to set ourselves apart in the job market. The result is that we suboptimize both our potential and our possibilities unless we can throw off those limitations. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we do that? Well, first we have to reject our own boxes. These are typically the labels we use to define ourselves, which in turn determine how we see our role in the job market. So as career activists, we have to stop thinking of ourselves as, quote, a job seeker, or as, quote, someone who is in transition. We are, each and all of us, much more than that, but only if we claim that greater role. Second, we have to reject the boxes that employers put us in. These are the labels they typically use to define who we are and thus our role in the workplace. That means we have to refuse to be seen as, quote, employees who can be shoehorned into, quote, a normal distribution, a construct created to describe data, not people, where only a small number of us can excel, most of us have to be average, and a small number of us are rated as substandard. What's the alternative to these 2 boxes? We should start seeing ourselves as a person of talent, whose job performance, whose contribution at work can only be scaled with a human distribution. You see, our culture has perverted the view of talent. You know, we've come to see talent as the province of extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. We think talent belongs to the people who win a made-for-TV dance contest or who win the Super Bowl. We think talent belongs to entertainers and professional athletes, and that's wrong. Talent is actually an attribute of our species. Talent isn't skill, it isn't competency, it is the capacity for excellence. And each and every single one of us is endowed with that gift. Each one of you, each one of your spouses and partners, each one of your kids, we all have that inherent capacity for excellence. Like an opposable thumb, it is a characteristic which defines us as humans. So the first thing a career activist has to do is discover their talent. Is it the ability to disaggregate complex ideas into their simpler components? Is it the ability to communicate complex ideas so they can be understood by everyone? Is it the ability to ferret out the cause-effect relationships in complex situations? Whatever it is, we need to figure out what that talent is. We have to give it the skills and knowledge of our profession, and then we have to resolve to bring it to work with us. That's the first step, the very first step in becoming a career activist. Once you see yourself as a person of talent, the second step in career activism is to establish a new paradigm, one that's going to make this new self-image of yours as a person of talent real. So while it's certainly less so in academia, many in the American workforce today see excellence as a destination rather than a journey. In other words, they believe that the best way to compete for a job is to look as complete as possible. Our culture has brainwashed folks into thinking that a college degree is the key to a successful career. So they go to school and then they see themselves as done. They put a check mark in the education box and expect to land a dream job. As tens of thousands of well-educated Americans can now attest, that seldom, if ever, happens. Why? Because as you probably know better than most, the world's knowledge is exploding. For example, for the first time ever, in 2008, humans developed 4 terabytes of new information in that 1 year. That's 4 times 10 to the 19th power. That's more new information being created in just 1 year than in the previous 5,000 years of human history. Technical knowledge is now doubling every 2 years. What's that mean? If you started college today, half of what you learned your freshman year would be obsolete by the time you reached your junior year. So how does a career activist compensate? You have to reimagine yourself. Whether you have a PhD, a master's or a bachelor's degree, whether you're experienced and published in your field or just starting out, you are not complete. You are and always will be incomplete. To put it another way, the career activist sees him or herself as a work in progress. They are a perpetual student, not only in their primary field, but in ancillary fields as well. And not just when it's convenient. In fact, career activists are students while they're looking for a job as well as when they are employed. They're searching for knowledge even while they're searching for employment. Then what? Well, I'm sure you've heard of the Human Genome Project. One of its most startling discoveries has been that at our most fundamental level, we humans are far more alike than we are dissimilar. In fact, among the strands of our DNA, we are just 3% different from one another. Despite that almost marginal degree of distinction, however, it's obviously easy for each of us to tell one another apart. Our unique differences, whether it's our height or our weight, our skin color, our hair color, our facial structure, whatever it may be, they're all observable, so we can use them to set ourselves apart. The same, unfortunately, cannot be said for written documents. We use a traditional resume or a CV or a vita to differentiate ourselves in the job market, yet those documents may well be the single worst medium for doing so. Individual differences simply don't register very well, at least with resumes and CVs in their current format. So what's the answer? Well, if you're a career activist and you see yourself as a work in progress, you have to revise the look and content of your CV or resume so that it depicts you as a work in progress, so that a recruiter who's only going to spend 30, 40, 50 seconds looking at your resume can right away determine that you're something different from the rest of the herd. So step 3 in career activism is to develop a resume or a CV or a vita that will position you as a person of talent who sees him or herself as a work in progress. Now, to do that, let's start at the top of the document. Most resume writers today will tell you to get rid of the old-fashioned objective statement. I think that's pretty good advice. Employers know what your objective is. You want a job with them. So basically, you're just wasting real estate on your resume by including the objective. What should you replace it with? Well, for the last decade or so, career experts have counseled that you shouldn't provide a skills summary in that space. And while I think that's useful, I don't think it sets you apart enough in today's job market. Therefore, I recommend that what you use that space for is to acknowledge the fact that you understand the definition of a qualified candidate has changed. Put a short, hard-hitting summary at the top of your resume or CV entitled "My Proposed Contribution." Then list the perspectives, the insights, the activities that you would bring to the employer's community to help it accomplish its mission. Second, in the experience section, if you've used a subtitle like accomplishments to describe your on-the-job performance, change that term to contributions. Yes, I understand that's semantics, but it's semantics with a purpose. It helps you underscore your understanding of what an employer wants today. Then add a new subsection under each of your former employers called Knowledge I've Acquired or Knowledge I've Gained. After you describe what you did in your previous job and how well you did it, list the wisdom or knowledge you acquired in and from that experience. In other words, your work wasn't just about performing tasks to an acceptable standard. It was also a growth experience, and you will be bringing that growth. You will be contributing that growth to your new employer. Finally, as a work in progress, even during a job search, you can truly differentiate yourself today by concurrently acquiring additional knowledge during your job search. Make sure you feature that ongoing learning exercise in the education section of your resume or CV, because it conveys a powerful subliminal message to any employer. It says you understand the rapid flow of new knowledge and you take personal responsibility for staying abreast of the current. The fourth step in career activism is to modify your behavior to act like a person of talent. And in a job search, at least, the single best way to do that is with your networking. Now, unfortunately, all the buzz about LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook have taught a lot of people to think of networking as a contact sport. They believe the goal is to build up as many connections, as many followers, as many friends as possible. But ask yourself this: to what end? Do you really think that someone who is the friend of a friend of a friend on the web will take the risk to their reputation and credibility to recommend you for a job when in truth they don't know you from boo? I don't think so. Most of us have listened to our mothers. We don't speak to strangers. So networking isn't a contact sport at all. It's a team sport. Its goal isn't to build up your address book, it's to develop relationships. How do you do that? By practicing the golden rule of networking. Whether you do it online or in the real world, you want to give as good as you get. Give as good as you get. If you want others to be helpful to you, you should first be helpful to them. And you must practice that rule all of the time. Networking is one of those rare words that says exactly what it means. It's network, not net get around to it whenever it's convenient. Where should you do it? Well, the real world is just as important as the virtual one for networking, but for this session, I'm going to focus on the web. And there, it's best to use a combination of venues. Those that serve your employed peers, the people in your profession who are already at work, as well as your peers who are in transition. Now, for the former, your employed peers, I recommend you use the discussion forum, the listserv, or the chat on the website of your professional society or association. CASE, for example, for fundraisers, or MLA for English faculty. You can access the sites for many professional societies at academics360.com. There's also an association directory on my site, Weddles.com. Both of those can connect you with those organizations so you can find those networking platforms and take advantage of them. For those in transition, if you want to connect with other folks who are in transition, I recommend that you use those same discussion forums, listservs, and chats, but on employment sites, on job boards and career portals. To get the best results, however, you always want to look for sites that attract the greatest number of your peers, and you always want to try to be as helpful to as many of them as possible. How can you determine which sites to use? Well, if you'll wait just a second, I'll cover that in the, let's see, the 6th step. So just hang on for that. Finally, yes, of course, I would use social media. But again, you should focus your attention where it will do you the most good, on those sites that attract your peers. For example, you'll get far better results from your networking if you participate in a LinkedIn group that caters to higher education professionals than you will in a blogger chat that attracts a broad range of job seekers. Okay, the 5th step in career activism is to look for employers that will enable you to do your best work. The more of your capacity for excellence you can tap on the job, the greater your contribution, and that optimizes your job security. And also, the greater your growth as a person of talent, and that optimizes your career security. So don't just look for a job, set your sights on finding and landing a career advancement opportunity. Now, I'm very respectful of the fact that it's easy to say that when you have a job and an income, and it's a heck of a lot harder to do when you don't. Nevertheless, the research shows that the fastest path to unemployment recidivism, or serial unemployment, is to take a position that won't serve you as well as your employer. And unfortunately, making that choice is tough. There are 2 times as many ways for an employer to be bad or wrong for you as there are for an employer to be exactly right. An employer can be bad for you if it misbehaves. You know, unfortunately, in fact tragically, there are today employers out there who abuse, who act like bullies with their employees. These are organizations, no matter how well they pay, no matter how prestigious their brand, who will ultimately harm your career and your career security. In addition, there are employers that will fit you badly. You know, there are very good employers that have a very specific culture, a very specific set of values, a very specific vision, and those values, that culture or that vision, may conflict with your personality. Once again, if you go to work for that kind of an organization, you cannot perform at your peak, you cannot excel, and as a consequence, you will undermine both your job security and your career security. So the key is to understand, to do your homework on all of the organizations that you are considering, and only apply at those that fit you well and that won't abuse your right to exercise and experience your capacity for excellence, your talent. Where can you get some of this information? Well, of course, there are a range of sites on the web that collect information about employers. Glassdoor.com, Vault.com, and Jobatorial.com, which used to be called JobVent. Now, a word of caution. I've found that the people who add comments on these sites have way too much free time on their hands. Most of the commentary is negative. So it's very important to balance out what you're hearing on the sites that cater to the negative comments with other comments that you can collect from your peers. All of that networking, those building of relationships that I talked about earlier, they provide you with an opportunity to tap into the insights and information of others just like you, who can tell you about their experience at those organizations. And finally, I urge you to test drive the finalists. Once you've narrowed down your consideration to an organization or two, you want to try as best you can to experience what it will be like to work in the organization. Now, obviously, unlike with a car, you can't take an employer out for a test drive, but you can find a surrogate. I think it's fair to say that the way that you are treated as a candidate in the recruiting process is a good reflection of the way you will be treated as an employee in the workplace. So if the organizations that you are considering treat you with respect, treat you with courtesy throughout the recruiting process, there is a good chance that that's exactly how they will treat you as an employee. But if you start to go through the recruiting process and you find that the organization doesn't provide you with that level of respect or courtesy that you deserve, then you want to take a second look at whether that's an employer where you really want to share your talent. The sixth step in career activism is to excel at online job search. Why? Well, survey after survey confirms that the number one way that employers fill jobs with external candidates is by posting their openings on a job board. In order for you to leverage that behavior, however, and also, as I said earlier, to find the best sites for networking, you have to know how to be a good consumer of job boards and a smart applicant. Now, here's the challenge. One of the things that I started doing as a result of my Wall Street Journal column is I got into the publishing business. And today we publish the largest circulation print guides to online employment sites in the U.S. There are, by our count, 150,000 job boards and career portals out there. So this is a very, very crowded marketplace. The key is to know where best to invest your time and effort so that you get the maximum return. I'm going to suggest that you use something that I would describe as the 4-to-1 method. To get one new job, you need to spend time on 4 different employment sites. 3 of those should be niche sites or sites that specialize. One of them should specialize in your particular profession. The second should be one that specializes in your particular industry, in this case, higher education. And the third should be one that specializes in your location or the place you want to live. And if you're willing to relocate, then double up on a site that specializes in your industry. Finally, you also want to use one of the general purpose websites out there. Now, everybody knows about Monster and Career Builder, and those are 2 very good general purpose recruiting sites, but there are literally hundreds of others that you can pick from. You want to pick the 4 best sites that will serve your particular career needs. Where can you identify them? Well, one resource that you might consider is the website of the International Association of Employment Websites. It is the trade organization for the global online employment services industry. Its website is shown here on the slide, employmentwebsites.org. About 40% of all of the websites, all of the employment websites on the web are members of the IAEWS worldwide. Those that aren't may not know about the organization, but a good number of them aren't members of the association because every member of the association has committed to a code of ethics. That code of ethics protects you as a job seeker as well as employers and recruiters. So these are organizations that, in my view, you can trust. They are a credible provider of employment services over the web. And finally, if you'd like to know some of what your fellow travelers in the job market think about various employment sites, you might check out the User's Choice Award winners at my site, Weddles.com. Every year we hold an open ballot where we let both job seekers and recruiters vote for their favorite employment sites. So this is clearly not a scientific survey, but it is a measure of the degree of support, the level of intensity of support that people have for various employment sites. These are, in my view, the most exclusive set of the highest performers on the web in the employment space. And we've listed the winners of the 2011 balloting, which was open from January through December last year. We had over 2,500 unique ballots cast. The 30 sites with the most ballots were declared winners, and they're listed at Weddles.com. So I said the second thing you have to do is to be a smart applicant. And I believe that the only true way to effectively apply for a job that's posted on a job board is to practice the application 2-step. Step number 1 is a test. It's a test to see whether you paid attention in Mrs. Murphy's kindergarten class. What was the first thing you learned in Mrs. Murphy's class? To follow instructions. So if the employer posts a job on a job board that says submit your resume by attaching it to an email message, don't cut and paste and embed it. If it says to embed it, don't attach it. If it says to send it by paper airplane, send it by paper airplane. Follow instructions. But as I said at the outset, there is a truncated funnel operating in the employer space today. Not every resume, unfortunately, will get looked at. So the key is to make sure that you ensure that your resume is as close to the top of the stack as possible. How do you do that? Well, step 2 is to leverage all of that networking you've been doing, all of those relationships you've been building with your peers, to leverage those relationships to try to find someone in the organization to which you have applied. And you reach out to them, and now, since you've been giving, you're likely to get the kind of support you deserve. You want to ask that person to walk the resume or the CV into the door of the HR department and to put it on the recruiter's desk. Because when that happens, the probability that your resume or CV gets looked at will go to 100%. Employers believe that the very best candidates come from employee referral. So if some employee walks your resume or CV in the door, there is a much, much higher probability that you're going to get the consideration that you deserve. Finally, the 7th step of career activism is to excel at career self-management. Now, I know that that's not a phrase that trips lightly off the tongue. In fact, when you say it, most people's eyes glaze over. It's a modern medical miracle, a cure for insomnia in 3 words. So let's use a metaphor. Let's analogize career self-management to something that we do know and appreciate, and that's our health. We all know 2 things about our health. The first is that we are individually responsible for our health. Nobody else can take care of that but ourselves. And secondly, we come to know this probably later in life than is best for us, but we all sooner or later learn that you have to take care of your health every single day. Well, the same is true of your career today. That's why I describe career self-management as career fitness. It's a way of taking care of the health of your career. 2 things are true. First, only you can take care of your career, not your boss, not your mentor, not your parents, not your employer, nobody else but you. And secondly, in today's world of work, you have to work on your career every single day. Why? Because careers, like our bodies, weaken as they age. The research shows that after age 35, you lose 5% of your muscle mass every 10 years. Unless you work out regularly. Well, the same is true with your career. After the age of 35, you lose 5% of your ability to succeed every 10 years, unless you are continuously building up the strength, the reach, the endurance of your career. Now, the bad news is that career self-management cannot be successfully performed by dilettantes or occasional users. But the good news is that career self-management can be learned. As with any other field of rigor, it is composed of a body of knowledge and a set of skills that we all can master. Sadly, however, most colleges and universities never offer that curriculum to their students. They teach them a great deal about a field of study, but absolutely nothing about how to make a successful career in that field. Contrast that with the situation in China. Today, every student at a 4-year college or university in China is required to take a course called Personal Mastery. It is a credit-granting course, and it is a requirement for graduation. You cannot, be graduated from a college or university in China if you don't pass Personal Mastery. And what is Personal Mastery all about? It is about the body of knowledge and set of skills involved in building career fitness and building a healthy career. What does that entail? Well, interestingly enough, there are also 7 areas of development for a healthy career. When obviously we don't have time to cover them all today, let me just briefly summarize them to give you a sense of how you can acquire this knowledge and be about being a good career self-manager. Excuse me. The first exercise, if you will, in career self-management is to pump up your career's cardiovascular system, the heart of your career. As you well know, probably better than the folks in any other profession, craft, or trade, the heart of your career is your expertise. But as I said earlier, keeping your expertise up to date is now a full-time job. Secondly, you want to strengthen your circulatory system. The circulatory system of your career is your network of contacts. The broader that circulatory system is, and the richer and deeper the relationships you form with it, the greater the opportunity you will have to not only tap into those unadvertised jobs, but to make sure that any job for which you apply that is advertised, you go to the top of the pile and get considered. Third, you want to develop all of your muscle groups. Increasingly today, employers are looking for multidimensional employees. They want people who not only have a deep core expertise, but have a range of other skills and knowledge that enable them to apply their core expertise in a greater range of situations and circumstances. They might speak a second language, for example, or have a deep expertise in an area of technology. Whatever it may be, they have a broader set of skills and knowledge than just their primary field. Fourth, you want to increase your flexibility and range of motion. As I suspect many of you are aware, the circumstances, the schedules, the arrangements, the settings for the way work is accomplished are now in turmoil. There are many, many different ways to work, many different kinds of employment situations, and the greater your ability to adapt to those changing circumstances and situations, the greater potential you have to lead a healthy career. Fifth, as I said earlier, the key to success is to work with winners. It is to understand that employers, there are many, many wonderful employers out there, but even wonderful employers can be a bad fit for you. So it's very important to pick organizations that will not only recognize and respect your capacity for excellence, but will actually empower and support your ability to deliver it on the job. Sixth, everything that I've described so far has to do with what can be helpful to you and to your career. But a healthy career is also about taking your talent, your unique capacity for excellence, and applying it to the good of others. Yes, of course, checkbook philanthropy is important, but there's also it is also extremely important to take your talent and to put it to work for others in social or civic organizations, or for the good of the planet, whatever it takes in order for you to apply your rare gift to the benefit of others. And finally, we have to learn to pace ourselves. Americans have lost the skill of leisure. We have to remember when we're laying on the beach that checking email back in the office, looking at our PDAs, staying in touch with our colleagues and friends doesn't allow the body and mind to rest and recuperate. The key to the United States retaining its competitive position in the global marketplace is innovation, creativity, imagination, the application of our knowledge and skills in new and different ways. And we can only do that if we have given our minds and bodies the rest that they need from time to time. Now, way back in the beginning of this session, I told you that it involved looking at yourself in a new way and becoming expert in a new set of behaviors. That's clearly a lot of change. So a fair question to ask is, why bother? And the short answer is that employers today are desperate for talent, because not a lot of people currently see themselves as a person of talent, and even fewer bring their talent to work with them. There is, as a result of that, a shortage in the workplace, and that shortage creates a huge opportunity for you. You've got two sets of data here. These data are from the Society for Human Resource Management. One set of data is from 2004. The second set of data is from 2008, right in the heart of the greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression. And look what happens. Companies, employers are so desperate for talent that the number of employers offering hiring bonuses to get the kind of talent they need was at 6 out of 10 in 2004, and in 2008, in the heart of the Great Recession, that number went up to 7 out of 10 employers. The same is true in terms of paying above market salaries. Just a quarter paid above market salary in 2004. 4 years later, in the heart of the Great Recession, that number went up to almost a third at 31%. And employers, if you're worried about job security, employers are also desperate to retain talented people. Employers, just over half of employers made market adjustments to salary. That is, they brought people's salary up to what the job market was demanding in 2004 at about 55%. And in 2008, the number of employers making those kinds of adjustments actually went up to almost 2/3, 65%. And the number of employers paying retention bonuses went from 27% in 2004 to almost 4 out of 10 in 2008. So the bottom line is that while this is admittedly an extraordinarily difficult job market, one that faces a lot of different or creates a lot of different challenges for everyone, there are ways not only to survive but to prosper in this environment. It does involve looking at yourself in a new way as a person of talent. It does involve a new paradigm, taking your talent to work with you as a work in progress, and doing the other things involved in career activism. But if you can do those things, there is great opportunity even in this very difficult job market. So that comes to the end of my presentation. I'm going to take a look at the chat here and see what questions you've asked in just a second. But first, the column, a derivative of my Wall Street Journal column, is a newsletter that I write. It comes out over the web every 2 weeks. It's a free publication. I'm actually writing 2 columns. One is for best practices in job search, and a second column is a newsletter about best practices in career self-management. If you'd like to get either or both of those newsletters, again, they're free. They come out over the web every 2 weeks. Just email me your name and email address to peter@weddles.com, and I'd be happy to sign you up. Finally, I hope you'll consider taking a look at some of my books. Much of what I've described with regard to career activism, the practices of career activism, is in a book called Work Strong. The whole ethos and credo of career activism is described in a book called The Career Activist Republic. And if you're tired of reading the traditional sort of career and job search book, I have a novel coming out this week, in fact, called A Multitude of Hope. Amazon is already taking pre-orders for it. This uses fiction to explore how the world of work is changing and what it means for all of us in the United States. Okay, let's see if I can get the chat function up here. All right, I've got some questions here. All right, let's see. It's moving around a lot, so there must be a lot of questions. Hang on. Let's see. Well, it looks like you've been chatting with each other a lot. So let me see if I can find a question here. Well, you all have been carrying on an interesting conversation yourselves. Let's see. Apparently, there was a fair amount of discussion about my statement about whether human resource folks are actually looking at